From the dawn of the new democratic dispensation, economic policy was already a highly contested terrain. This is according to academic Professor Patrick Bond, who was at the coalface of assisting with policy making at the time. Many economic policies, from the Reconstruction and Development Programme, the Growth, Employment and Redistribution Strategy, which came into effect in 1996, through to the current day Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan, have been formulated to help South Africa achieve impactful growth for the masses. But in practice, the richer have got richer, while inequality, poverty and high unemployment continue to be cited as key scourges in society.
Back in 1996, when there was a rumor that President Mandela had fallen sick, and that meant he fired our whole RDP office and put Jay Naidu as Minister of Post and Telecommunication to privatize telecom and then imposed gear. And that was something I think Mandela ultimately can be blamed for. He had a lot more room for maneuver in our view, but unfortunately the bloc around him with Thabo Mbeki, Alec Irwin, Tito Mboweni, especially Trevor Manuel, who'd just been appointed the finance minister, that was a bloc that really wanted to liberalize South Africa. And from that, many problems have followed, especially our vulnerability to the world economy.
Trevor Manuel was the second finance minister of the newly democratic South Africa, after his predecessor, Chris Liebenberg, who is said to have taken an IMF loan in 1993, which stipulated many terms that the country had to adhere to over the years. Manuel took the reins in April 1996, and while there were socio-economic challenges in South Africa at the time, Manuel sounded confident about the country's fortunes.
Madam Speaker, the South African economy has expanded continuously since September 1999. Its pace of growth slowed slightly in 2001-2, and since 2003 we've grown by an average of 5% a year. This is the longest continuous period of growth on record. GDP per person has increased by over 20% since 2000. During the past 5 years, employment has increased at a faster pace than at any point in the past 20 years, adding over 1.5 million jobs. So as we present a picture of where we are now, we must also tell all South Africans in the world that our ship is stronger and that we are better prepared than during the previous episodes of global turmoil.
Professor Bond gives context to what the global economy looked like at the time.
In that period, we had a global upturn in commodity prices, a commodity super cycle. We also had deregulated finance. The credit system was, quite wild and crazy, and everyone was borrowing. And then later, more restrictions were imposed. If you put those two things together as one-offs, as instances where the world economy and local liberalization, if you say we're much more in debt, we can buy more today, okay, we have to pay it back later. Yes, that explains that period, 2002 to 2008, of about 5% growth.
Just months before being ejected from the finance ministry top job, Nhlanhla Nene was pegging economic growth of 1.5% for 2015 and 1.7% for 2016 in what was his last midterm budget speech. At the time, he painted a picture of an economy that needed much more investment than it was getting.
Building houses, honorable members, is not enough. We have to reshape our cities to create integrated and productive living environments. Our education and training capacity is not enough. We have to invest in quality improvements and meet new skills requirements. Our levels of investment are also not enough. We have to modernize technology and compete effectively in the global economy. Our present retirement and insurance arrangements are not enough. We need a more comprehensive approach to social security.
And it appears that even then, the usual suspects were responsible for downward revisions in growth.
Electricity supply constraints, falling commodity prices and lower confidence levels have resulted in our growth forecasts being revised lower.
Throughout the years, South African finance ministers have encouraged the public to engage as part of the budget process. Pravin Gordhan got 2 shots at the role of finance minister, always emphasizing on South Africans working together to achieve a common goal and speaking out against corruption.
On what we do well, South Africans were very clear. Firstly, we pay social grants well, and secondly, we collect tax revenue well. Secondly, what should we stop doing? Excuse me. corruption and waste, and bailing out state entities, both of which we agree with. Thirdly, how do we support inclusive growth? And here the response overwhelmingly was support for small businesses and job opportunities targeting the youth.
Malusi Gigaba was appointed finance minister by former President Jacob Zuma in March 2017, after Pravin Gordhan was removed from the seat. He delivered his one and only February 2018 budget when the country was temporarily hypnotized by so-called Ramaphoria, which had swept the nation. Optimism that all of a sudden the country's socio-economic fortunes were set to change for the better.
Fellow South Africans, we have the opportunity to achieve faster and more inclusive growth, to create jobs for our people and a better life for all South Africans. That opportunity comes from a favorable global economic outlook, with many of our trading partners doing well, and from improved prices for our exports. That opportunity comes from a fiscal framework which has improved markedly since the October medium-term budget policy statement. That opportunity comes from a stronger rand and favorable inflation outlook.
Despite his great outlook, official data later showed that the South African economy grew by a mere 0.8% in 2018 compared to the year before. South Africa has been growing around the 1% mark for the past 10 years, with the COVID-19 crisis nearly bringing the economy and society to its knees. But the governing party says it's always put the country's social imperatives first.
Our mission over the past 30 years has been to restore both social and economic justice for our nation, and to decisively address the inequality that was the hallmark of the system of discrimination and dispossession. The budgets we've tabled since 1994 have been about securing the goal of growing the economy so that we can do more to address the inequalities and deprivation that still scar our society and undermine the promise of democracy.
Professor Bond notes that many of the finance ministers, including Pravin Gordhan as well as Malusi Gigaba, were known to be left-leaning in their political beginnings, but seemingly once they got into the finance ministry, their ideological leanings didn't appear to be evident.
Maybe that's the most important lesson of this period of 30 years, that no matter your ideology and no matter the moment in time in which you're trying to develop a new set of ideas, we are subject to the rules of the world economy because we've liberalized too fast on trade, on finance and investment. So, there's not that much room for maneuver until we tighten up and put on new exchange controls and put on maybe protective barriers for infant industries like solar, electric vehicles, or especially begin to discipline foreign companies that take too much money out of the country, take too many minerals and non-renewable resources away, and don't reinvest enough.
For millions of ordinary South Africans, life has remained tough with the realization of basic dreams seemingly out of sight. Despite a number of efforts, there's been a failure to stimulate economic growth to levels that can sufficiently catalyze growth in jobs. And with elections around the corner, voters will likely be scrutinizing the contents of parties' manifestos to gauge whether their economic policy solutions to today's socio-economic woes more realistically align with what they want to see transpire in their lives and those of their children over the next 5 to 10 years. Nompumelelo Siziba, SABC News, Johannesburg.